Hello, my little art stars. How are you? I have something so fun to share with you. In today's video, I'm going to give you a really simple diagram that I recently rediscovered in Joseph Zbukvic's wonderful, amazing book, Mastering Atmosphere and Mood in Watercolor. This book is so great. I've had it for years. I pulled it out I was wanting to look at it, painting how he did his misty work. He does beautiful, misty, dreamy work. And so I pulled it out and I started flipping through all the pages and I came across the Watercolor Clock. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been talking about in almost every single tutorial I've ever done about milk tea cream consistency paint on dry, wet, buckling, glistening paper. But he has made this beautiful way to conceptualize all the different pairings that you can have between all these different wetness levels on your paper paired with different consistencies of paint in your brush. And I love this. And he talks about how he made it into a clock motif to remind us that it is very much dependent on timing. And what I mean by that is when you get your paper wet, but you want to paint on damp paper, not super wet, glistening paper, you gotta wait. It's a waiting game. So you've gotta watch that clock. And in fact, I literally often will set a timer to remind me to wait because I'm so impatient that I will paint on my paper before it's time. So this clock is going to really help us understand how to have all these different pairings to get a full range of techniques. And I can't wait to tell you about it. So let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Rachel's Studio. For those of you who are new to the channel, my name is Rachel Parker Varner. And on this channel, I like to talk about not just the how, but the why of watercolor. So you move along your painting journey a lot faster. Come join my community on Facebook where you can post your paintings and get feedback and also give feedback to others or ask watercolor questions and get to know us and learn from my community. It's really great, very supportive community. We have a great time there. You can follow me for free on Patreon too. And you can follow me on my community tab here on YouTube. I post there a lot too. And so we're going to talk about what the watercolor clock is and why you need it and explore a little bit of all the possibilities it hands to you as an artist on a platter, how to get all kinds of different marks from super soft, light, dreamy, wispy effects all the way down the other end of the spectrum to super dry, super dark, think dry brush, like sparkles on water. This watercolor clock will help you figure out how to get those effects. And I'm so excited to share it with you. So he says, "It is my hope that the watercolor clock will help you conquer what is surely the most difficult medium of all. Properly understand, the watercolor clock holds the key to the magical world of watercolor. Indeed, if you take time to absorb each section of the watercolor clock, you will never again wonder how to leave a particular brush mark or achieve that special effect." I love that. And it's so true. All right, let's take a look at the watercolor clock. That's probably the easiest way for you to kind of understand where this is going. And it's really amazing, I think. And especially for people who are new to watercolor, they may not realize all the different variations you can get both in how much water you have on your paper and how much water you have mixed into your paint. So on this side, it's looking at how wet your paper is. Your paper can be wet where you just applied a bunch of water, not puddling. You almost never want puddling, but wet. We often call this glistening. So when you move your paper, you can see it glisten. The water is sitting on top of your paper. It hasn't soaked in. As it soaks in, we move up the clock and we go to moist, where maybe your paper starts to buckle. The water starts to soak into your paper. And when you paint on wet paper, your paint is going to bloom out more. When you paint on moist paper, it's going to bloom out a little less, but still be soft. When you paint on damp paper, which is very buckling and maybe cool to the touch, and you paint on this kind of paper with different paint consistencies, you'll get a lot different effects. This is actually a stage where you can get cauliflowers. And so there's a lot to know about this one stage in paper moisture level. If you go in on damp paper, and your brush is too drippy, you can get what are called cauliflowers. But if you go in with thicker paint, like say cream consistency or butter consistency, thicker paint, you can get beautiful, soft, but very controlled lines and edges and small details. Think, for example, if you're painting the eyeliner of a cat and you want it to look soft, but obviously it has to be very controlled. I love to paint cat eyeliner on damp paper with cream or butter consistency paint. Okay, so, and then the driest, of course, is bone dry, which this is where you use your dry brush techniques. This is where you use your paint to create jewelry a lot of times, where you're painting tiny little details. Again, like for a cat, just for an example, say the pupils in the eye, or for a painting on of a landscape, it would be maybe something that has definite boundaries like the trunk of a tree. Okay, and then let's look at this side. Now we have different consistencies of paint to water ratios. So tea is very watery. When you tilt up your palette with tea consistency paint, it drips readily. Coffee drips, but slower. Milk will still drip slowly, but it might bead a bit. Cream consistency beads. And then butter is almost sticky. It has very little water added to it. So when you paint on butter, if you paint with butter consistency paint, it gives you the full strength of that color and the full darkness. As dark as that color will go, that's what butter will give you. With cream consistency, that's also usually going to be the full strength of that color. Milk, you're starting to get into the lighter variations. When you paint with milk consistency paint, it can have a beautiful effect. It can be very rich, but also have that fluid watercolor look because it does have quite a bit of water added to it. Coffee will dry a little bit lighter than milk, and tea will dry the lightest of all. And so then you look at this in terms of pairing these. So say you have paint on moist paper with tea consistency paint. You'll get soft blossoms, like soft clouds on maybe a misty day. And then say you paint on dry paper with cream consistency paint. That is going to give you perhaps dry brush effects, or it's going to give you super dark, very controlled marks. So depending on how much water you've got mixed into your paint paired with how much water is on your paper will give you wildly different results. And so this kind of blasts open the world of possibilities with watercolor. Think of all the different variations you can create with all these components, and it will empower you as an artist to be able to get so many different looks to your marks, which is crucial to making an aesthetically pleasing painting, because you want to have some marks that are softer and lighter and some that are dark and striking and hard-edged and everything in between. And so understanding how watercolor works through this watercolor clock, I think will be very empowering to you. It's a great way to think in terms of how watercolor works. All right, let's look at an actual painting and see if we can find out what orientation they are on the clock. So let's look at this whole background. When I painted this whole background, I got this whole area wet because, and this is the why, I wanted a soft diffuse background where the colors and the values just melted into each other. So I painted all this wet with clean, clear water, no puddles, and then I painted on milk to, I would say, thick whole milk. It's like whole milk into this whole area. And that's why it looks so soft and diffused, but it has variation in colors and a little bit of variation in values. So it would have been about 615-ish, because I would have painted it wet on wet paper with milk consistency paint. All right. How about a tiny little detail like his eyelash? That would have been on dry paper with cream consistency paint. and then say these colors in his shirt. I painted those on dry paper as well because I wanted to get the harder lines in the folds of his shirt. So I painted that on dry paper with milk consistency paint. Here's an area where I painted on moist paper. I painted his, I got his arm wet and then let it dry a little bit. And then I painted with cream consistency paint on moist paper. And then I lifted this highlight out of his arm. This is an interesting spot, this tie-dye looking area. This was painted on damp paper with cream consistency paint. And then I dropped in little drops of water between it to create those cauliflowers that you can get when you're working on damp paper. So these cauliflowers were because I dripped a little bit of clean, clear water between the blue stripes to create more of a tie-dye look. All right, so those are just a few examples of different orientations on the clock that I use to get a variety of effects. So the watercolor clock shows us all the different pairings that you can have to kind of unleash the potential of watercolor. This really helps you really be able to understand how many different effects you can get with watercolor just by looking at all the different pairings of this clock. I have done a video about this probably about 2 years ago, but I didn't remember the watercolor clock at the time. So I will link that video here where I will go more in depth with actual techniques using several of these different pairings and give you an actual visual of what they would look like. Thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial. I would love for you to learn from me more in depth where I share all the things that I'm learning because I'm also on an art journey and I share that with my Patreon followers where you can follow me for free on Patreon. And I'll put a link here. You can follow me for free on my Facebook group where I always post my new videos and what I'm working on. And of course, you're also able to post your paintings there. So that's really fun. And I comment on pretty much every painting that gets posted there. And if I don't, or you ask me a question and I don't get back to you, just message me because I just didn't see it. So I'd love to see you there. I'd love for you to join my Patreon if you would like to learn from me more in depth. My $5 tier just closed. So that is no longer available. I still do have quite a few spots at my $8 tier level, and my $13 tier level I think is the best value because you get access to the most tutorials and they are very in-depth, and I put my very best tutorials in the $13 tier. So I recommend that tier, but the $8 tier you also get access to a very large library of tutorials. I hope to see you there. Y'all are my art stars and I appreciate you so much. So I will see you next time. Now go watercolor your world. Bye everybody. But on moist paper, and what's with all the memes in 2023 about the word moist? I don't know. Well, I kind of know, but still, really? So funny. Okay, is it though? I don't know. But moist paper, and I'm going to say that word a lot. Moist, moist, moist. Let's all get used to it.